We're delighted at AUSA to be able to support our Army. We want to thank you for joining us this morning for this ILW Contemporary Military Forum entitled Ready and Lethal. As your professional association, the Association of United States Army's Institute of Land Warfare is proud to provide forums like this one not only during the annual meeting, but throughout the year. We broaden the knowledge base of Army professionals and those who support our Army. Today is the second day of the AUSA's annual meeting, and we will continue to amplify the U.S. Army's narrative to audiences inside the Army and help to further the Association's mission to be voice for the Army, support for the soldier. As you may know, we cannot do this alone. AUSA relies on its members to help tell the Army story and to support our soldiers and their families. A strong membership base is vitally important for our advocacy efforts in Congress, the Pentagon, and the Defense Industrial Base, as well as to the public in communities across the country through AUSA's 123 local chapters. At this time, we'd like to recognize our members. Thereby, if you are an AUSA member, please stand to be recognized. And now the kicker. For those of you, Army professionals, who are not yet members of your professional association, we encourage you to join. And you can do that by visiting the AUSA membership booth, which is booth 307 in Exhibit Hall A, or you can sign up online at ausa.org/membership. So if you're already a member of AUSA, again, we thank you for staying with us. And now, enough babble from me. I'd like to get to the heart of the matter here. I'd like to turn the floor over to General Richardson, Deputy CG of United States Army Forces Command.
Okay, good morning. Can everybody hear me okay? Folks in the back of the room, I'll look for there we go. I got a thumbs up. Excellent. Well, certainly welcome to this panel this morning. It's the Ready and Lethal Contemporary Military Forum. So I really appreciate everybody's attendance today. And I'm Lieutenant General Laura Richardson. I'm the Deputy Commanding General at Forces Command. And so I'm going to do a short opening and then turn it over to every panel member to also do an opening as well. And then we'll go ahead and go into questions and answers. But certainly really appreciate your attendance this morning again. So at Forces Command, our every effort is focused on the readiness and lethality of the total force. And in this untiring pursuit of the objectives identified in the National Defense Strategy. To meet these objectives, we need to think about how we can and are making the Army ready and lethal across the breadth of the total Army force and every level of war. The panelists we have here today will take you through how we are improving global dynamic overmatch through multiple echelons. We are committed to improving our tactical lethality, enabling our expeditionary capacity, ensuring total force competency, and readily demonstrating operational mastery. Each of these elements are essential components towards achieving the strategic effect of communicating our strength and our capabilities to our partners, peers, and emerging threats alike. Mr. Joe Lethality, sitting right next to me, he is the director of the Close Combat Lethality Task Force, a cross-functional task force comprised of over 25 senior Joint Service, Special Operations Command, and Department of Defense personnel, charged with ensuring that the close combat units of the United States are dominant in any operational or environmental context. In this capacity, Mr. Lethality reports directly to the Secretary of Defense, and his responsibilities include developing, implementing, and overseeing the comprehensive array of the Department of Defense's close combat initiatives. Prior to his assignment as a director, he was the senior advisor to the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Readiness and also a decorated retired Marine Corps officer with multiple combat tours. Mr. Lethality is ensuring that at the most basic level, we are achieving tactical overmatch. Major General Jim Meekness, sitting next to him, is the Commanding General of the 82nd Airborne Division. He is our direct link to the Soldier Lethality CFT, and his elements are the Army's critical component of the Global Response Force, able to respond in mere hours across the globe. These forces ensure that we maintain a measure of assured access and expeditionary capacity to enable operational overmatch, inserting forces at a time and place of our choosing. Major General Courtney Carr is the Adjutant General of the Indiana National Guard. Major General Carr's forces are demonstrating the tremendous capabilities and initiatives and competence of the total Army force, and I'm really excited for you to hear his remarks. Courtney is a great example of the depth of our force in ensuring sustained capability. Lieutenant General Paul Funk, Commander 3 Corps and Fort Hood, and the former commander of the Combined Joint Task Force for Operation Inherent Resolve. And Lieutenant General Funk's success in combat is an example of the lethality that we are able to generate, that we're able to refine and project through our training programs, and how these programs enable leaders to succeed regardless of the complexity of the mission. Dr. Catherine Dale, Director of RAND's Center for Russia and Eurasia. Dr. Dale's efforts are renowned. She holds a robust history as a strategic advisor to senior military leaders in both operational and institutional settings, with distinct roles in EUCOM, Afghanistan, Iraq, and the Republic of Georgia. I have asked Dr. Dale to communicate how demonstrating our ready and lethal forces hold strategic implications. We are charged with being ready to deploy, fight, and win decisively against any adversary, anytime, anywhere, in a joint, multi-domain, high-intensity conflict. Our ability to steadily achieve this is the foundational element of our profession. Readiness isn't about just having a plan. Readiness is about doing everything we can to minimize the time necessary to deploy competent, capable, combat-ready forces across the globe for any contingency. War doesn't run on a fixed time schedule, so we must fundamentally shift our mindset to be ready now. We are doing this at FORCECOM as we set the conditions for global dynamic overmatch. To do this, we must be able to achieve overmatch at every level of war. Tactically, we must be able to decisively defeat any foe of like size. Operationally, we must be able to leverage all the assets at hand to enable maneuver and generate options for the tactical commander. At the strategic level, we must be able to project and sustain combat-ready forces globally to seize the initiative while retaining the simultaneous capability to deter others. Achieving overmatch at every level through readiness and lethality enables us to readily demonstrate global strategic overmatch, portraying our ready ability to secure our partners, defeat our foes, and deter present and emerging threats. We have taken tremendous steps across the total Army to improve our lethality and our readiness. Our level of training readiness has increased significantly over the years. As you know, our CTCs are the crucible experience for our units and are essential to building readiness. We are providing them the most challenging possible conditions through complex, decisive action scenarios. And because we know that when we establish competency and then mastery, everything else is possible. The CTC scenarios include a highly realistic operational environment where all domains are competitive. In fact, in the 14-day scenario, over 58 hours include denied communications. There are multiple CBRNE events every single day, and there is competitive offensive and defensive cyber efforts. We have integrated SOF and host nation partners into every rotation to provide the detailed coordination needed for combined efforts. Units of the CTC operate in an expeditionary environment, forcing them to conduct the frequent command node displacements necessary for survival in maneuver warfare. To prepare our division and corps level leadership, our warfighter training audiences face similar challenges. And in fact, whenever the command post displaces in the scenario, they are forced to displace in the live environment as well. To challenge the unit further, we are also conducting BCT live fire exercises at the National Training Center. And now we have completed the first BCT live fire exercise at the Joint Readiness Training Center as well. This is a tremendous shift in our focus, and in fact, from 2005 to 2014, in the midst of two wars, FORSCOM did not conduct any BCT live fire exercises. We have taken positive measures to revive the readiness and lethality of the force for decisive action. The force has recognized this and through their combined efforts have achieved the highest readiness we have seen in decades. In fact, this year we have achieved a 33% increase in the number of regular Army units achieving the highest readiness status possible. This effort has taken time, and since 2015, platoon live fire exercises have increased 63%. Company live fires have increased 117%. Battalion live fire exercises have increased 154%. And age 64 company live fires have increased 300%. And Ready Now extends throughout the total Army. A point emphasized by the Indiana National Guard as they prepare to conduct the first ever battalion level live fires for the National Guard at the CTC. This is a fundamental change in the way that we are addressing readiness through capability and through competence. War doesn't arrive on schedule, so we have to be ready, and we have to be ready now. In aviation, we have set the gold standard in maintenance and readiness for the Department of Defense by refining our focus on the soldier maintainer as well as the platform. Through systems such as our monthly aviation readiness review and the aviation business rules, we have maximized our employment of this very valuable asset while ensuring its safety and functionality. We have involved division commanders in this process, set priorities, and given leverage to our combat aviation brigade commanders. As a result, we have significantly reduced the non-mission capable maintenance rates across the aviation fleets while supporting our training and our missions worldwide. To gauge our true readiness to be ready now, as well as stress the system, we have also instituted a series of emergency deployment readiness exercises, or EDREs, often based on the most difficult of circumstances and at the most inopportune time. These events are kept extremely close hold for maximum effect. They are externally evaluated, and they are purposely drafted based upon potential immediate requests for forces. For 2nd Brigade, 10th Mountain, their mode of transportation to the Joint Readiness Training Center changed from train to ship. And so they happened, and this is all why the division headquarters was deployed as well, all with the purpose of stressing the systems on the installation and on the ground. And to make it even more difficult, we had them conduct the deployment through the Port of Philadelphia, which it had been 10 years since the Army had deployed through that port. In over a decade, had gone through the Port of Philadelphia. And it's not just the combat arms units that we're focused on. In August, we also alerted the 528th Hospital Center and their associated units to deploy with no notice from Fort Bliss to Fort Carson. They drew replicated APS equipment from the Sierra Army Depot in California, and they established a 148-bed hospital at Fort Hunter Liggett, California. We're all in this together, and readiness requires repetitions just like this to really gauge our capabilities. We are building the entire team to move at the speed of war. To speed this team's movement to the fight, we are taking proactive measures to reduce non-deployable soldiers as well. And since 2015, we have reduced our non-deployables by close to 10%. Our current efforts will refine this further with an objective to reduce down to 5%. We are also taking proactive measures to integrate multiple soldier health-focused objectives to reduce injuries and improve readiness. An example of this is our soldier readiness test and training programs. There we proved that the integration of enablers such as dietitians, strength and conditioning coaches, and physical and occupational therapists, we could reduce MRC3 non-deployables pretty significantly. And actually, we have done that decrease down by 45%. And if you think that that's impressive, just wait until you hear General Carr talk about his program at Camp Atterbury. We are also making ourselves more deployable to right-size our equipment, and we have executed 180,000 lateral transfers in 2017. In 2018, it was 117 lateral transfers, exceeding our goal to get the most updated equipment to the right units while removing the burden of legacy equipment. In doing so, we have established the highest equipment on hand, or what we call our S-level ratings, since 2011. And in fact, since October of 2017, a previous high water mark for us, we increased readiness levels to the highest rating for an additional 5 brigade units and 68 battalion level units. Our focus on future capabilities has also improved. We partnered with each of the CFTs, adapting to the developmental ops methodology envisioned by the Secretary of the Army. This enables direct feedback from operators to developers to fine-tune the systems and requirements for future capabilities while enabling FORSCOM to meet the regulatory requirements. Our efforts are operating hand in hand with the Army Futures Command as we provide the voice of the tactical and operational commanders from the battlefield. We are achieving success in building the Army that we need. We are ensuring that we can meet the demands of our nation and that we are ready now for whatever the future holds. At this time, I'll pass it to Mr. Joe Lethality. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I'd like to first thank AUSA for the opportunity to explain the CCLTF. I realize that we have some uneven situational awareness about what the CCLTF does, what it is. So I'll start back when the earth cooled, back in May of 2017, with the Secretary's initiation of the CAPE Close Combat SPEAR, or Strategic Portfolio Review. The Secretary directly tasked CAPE in conjunction with the services and the Joint Staff to take a look at our investments within the close combat formations of the Department for one very simple reason, and it's the brutal calculus of close combat. Nearly 90% of our nation's casualties are suffered by 4% of the force that receives about 1% of the RTD&E budget. Now, granted, that's across the total force, about 2.1 million people, but I would tell you that even in an infantry-centric organization like the Army or the Marine Corps, that math is still pretty brutal. In recognition of that, the services, CAPE, went on about a 6-month journey down into the investment portfolios and identified about $2.5 billion worth of additional investments to be invested into those close combat formations. So what do we mean by close combat formations? We're talking specifically about the squad level formations within the infantry, the cavalry, and the special operations forces, okay? We bounded around those squad level formations in order to prevent dilution of the efforts, since that's where the casualties are formed. As you begin to escalate beyond, say, platoon, company, battalion, brigade, we wanted to focus on literally where the close combat price tag was being paid. Now, one thing I want to make clear is that the CCLTF, which is, I'll talk about how we evolved after the Cape Spear, was not stood up in order to fix the infantry formations of the Department of Defense. The Army, the Marine Corps, SOCOM, we produce magnificent infantry. The objective here is to take a look at the opportunities that are attendant and take it to the next level. The second sort of, I guess, say, guiding principle would be that the CCLTF does this in conjunction with the services, not to the services. There are significant Title X equities at play, and the Secretary's guidance has been very clear that we are supporting arm and will lend his emphasis where appropriate and help the services realize their pathways to overmatch down at the squad level. Another thing I need to bring up is that the close combat spear, in the eyes of the Secretary, was a good endeavor, but it was not comprehensive. In other words, the Secretary's position, and I think we would all agree, that what goes into the soldier or Marine is more important than what goes on the soldier or Marine. And the Cape Spear was decidedly weighted against those material things that we could accomplish in a very short time period. So by virtue of when the Cape Spear was stood up, and also when the CCLTF was stood up, it was because of sort of the budget cycles that existed that we ended up weighted against the material challenges. Now, having said that, around December, the Secretary sent a runner down to my office where I was sitting as the Senior Advisor for Readiness and said, "Congratulations, you have a new job." That was on February 8th, and that's when the CCLTF was stood up in order to provide that more comprehensive view of what we can do to assist increasing the lethality, resilience, survivability of our close combat formations. So in a period of about from February 8th to I think March 16th, about 45 days, the CCLTF, which was around 4 or 5 folks at that time, began to attract the manpower from throughout the services, the Joint Staff, OSD, SOCOM, contractor support, and we got to about the 25 individuals that Major General Richardson described. The first task, of course, was to build the task force. We were building it in flight because of emerging budgetary requirements. But in short order, we published a directive-type memorandum. You can go online and you can look at that memorandum. At the end of the day, the memorandum does 2 things. One, it articulates the governance of the CCLTF, and then number 2, it states what our objectives are. We crafted 6 lines of operation that you can see up on the slide there. I double-hashed manpower policy because I believe that we have transitioned to manpower policy now being the main effort of the CCLTF. So very quickly, I'll run you through the lines of effort of the CCLTF, and I think that'll take us to about my 5 to 8 minutes of prepared remarks. On manpower policy, what the Secretary aims to achieve is to minimize the distractions to cohesion, stability, and lethality. Having said that, we all know that there are significant challenges to stabilizing and achieving the level of cohesion that the Secretary envisions. However, we believe within the CCLTF that the cohesion requirement for those close combat formations is truly unique. In other words, that the squads deserve, quite frankly, a level of cohesion that may be higher than other formations within the department. And so we're working very hard to determine how we can provide that level of cohesion. How do we remove distractors? The Army has done really magnificent work through the reduction of common mandatory training classes, as well as getting at the brigade and below requirements, and has, through a series of memorandums, reduced the amount of distractions, but there's a lot of work to go. We need to get at the borrowed military manpower piece, and we're taking a hard look at that. I would tell you that in the eyes of the CCLTF, you know, we look at the squad almost the way you would look at a professional sports team. And if you were to grab, you know, the quarterback or the linebacker or whatever from a 13-man team or a 9-man team and pull them out for a borrowed task, it has just as much impact on the cohesion and lethality of that squad as it would on a team. And so we're taking a hard look at that, and we can anticipate that there will be some policy recommendations that we will socialize through the services and ultimately to the Secretary, hopefully to provide some relief. On human performance, this is one that's really exciting to us because we see that what we do in the human performance realm will ultimately pay for itself. If you look at non-EAS attrition through injuries and things like that, there's a significant immediate payback for the efforts you undertake to minimize injuries and focus on injury prevention versus injury treatment. And so we're standing right behind the Army and Marine Corps programs to get at that. In addition to that, there's a lot of very exciting emerging science on the measuring of biometrics or autonomics for the human body in order to anticipate the times when a bespoke intervention is required to keep somebody within a training exercise or even a training pipeline. In discussions with SOCOM and the Marine Special Operations community, there's some that believe that the amount of grist our nation can produce for those formations is almost, we're there, and yet we're attempting to grow it. But if you look at like the basic reconnaissance course within the Marine Corps, you've got an 80% failure rate for the BRC course. So what if through precision measuring of human performance, you could introduce those interventions, those training interventions, and say, hey, this individual is overtraining, this individual needs sleep, this individual's diet is off, and you could change that curve from 80% to 50 or 30, then that might actually be your gap closer for the lack of inventory for those special organizations. So human performance investments, we're going at it hard and hope to actually bend the power curve up with more investment. Within training, we can bring the best grist to the mill and train it really well. The Army's AUSA extension is very exciting to us. But at the end of the day, what we do after we receive that basic trained individual is of vital importance. And to that end, you can see the reprogramming effort to put significant resources behind virtual reality to give those 25 reps before battle that the Secretary envisions. I would tell you it's probably going to be more like 250 or maybe 1,000 reps if we do this correctly. I want to stress, however, that that is additive to traditional training methods. You're not going to be able to clep out, if you will, from the taking the fire team and the squad down to the football field and doing hand and arm signals to control movement, live fire events, et cetera. Those all need to continue apace, but what we can get out of the virtual reality are the reps. And we can also get sort of the coaching that is scientifically animated. In other words, the capabilities that we envision will actually provide a squad lethality rating, and we can pinpoint areas where we need to increase training and resources to increase the lethality of the squad. Warfighter equipment and weapon systems, I've really kind of covered that already. I will tell you that since the Cape Spear, if you look at some of the, if you look at the omnibus reprogramming and the ATR specific to virtual reality, IVAS, and then consider the things that we would like to support through the Cape issue paper, we're looking about another $1 billion worth of investments to increase the lethality of our squads. And then lastly, science, technology, research, and development. One of the first things the CCLTF did upon inception was to go out to the department and try to baseline the investments in S&T and R&D in support of specifically the Coast Combat formations. What we learned was that there really wasn't a single community of interest that could draw those disparate investments. We found 320 investments in science and technology, R&D, across the department that had a close combat nexus, and we are in the process of trying to develop that community of interest to identify the overlaps and the gaps, et cetera. I would tell you, in my opinion, it's not a good news story. If you look at specifically $6.4, close combat initiatives receive about 0.08% of the department's total R&D and S&T. That is a curve that we would like to bend, and we think our advocacy within the CCLTF would help do that. So those are my remarks to introduce the CCLTF this morning. I'd like to turn it over to General Mingus.
Thank you. Good morning, and I would also like to thank AUSA for allowing us to be here. I'm truly humbled and honored. I think I've been in command for all of about 90 days, and for those that understood the last 2 years, there's a permanent smile on my face and still trying to figure this out, but humbled and honored to be here. General Abrams shows a slide that has a picture of some folks rolling down the Audubon back in the 80s during the Cold War. And he talks about an expeditionary mindset, and that's what I was kind of asked to talk about this morning is what does it take to have that expeditionary mindset? And we can throw the terms out there like anywhere in the world in 18 hours, but there's a ton of things behind that, and there's a ton of things that have to go into making that a reality. And for us, it starts with defining our mission kind of from top to bottom. With 3 Corps and 18th Airborne Corps kind of going port and starboard, and a mission that General Funk will talk about here in just a little bit, the division was given the mission of a standing JTF, which we exercise and continue to take very seriously, which oversees the next component of that, which is the Global Response Force. Many people believe the Global Response Force is tied to a single infantry brigade combat team, but the reality is there's dozens of formations throughout FORSCOM and the Army that are part of the Global Response Force. There's a postal company from Fort Lewis. There's a heavy component of this, in which we have to have forums and sessions in which we exercise and talk about the response levels of what the Global Response Force is. But with that comes the great unknown, and having to be prepared for the great unknown, which is a challenge. Inside of Focus Readiness, we also have the Joint Forcible Entry requirement, ×2 now. So 2 brigades that are able to execute that mission in pretty short order. So what does it take to do that? It takes the right people, it takes the right equipment, and the right level of training. We constantly have to have discussions with both HRC on the officer and the enlisted side. Just like in the SOF community, to get a 3-time volunteer, it is not an easy task. To keep them and grow them over time for 15, 20 years, to build that command sergeant major, to build that sergeant first class, to build that first sergeant that can do the things associated with being in an airborne unit, it takes constant management with our HRC folks. The right equipment. 2 years ago, before these requirements came, if we had 35 platforms to be able to do heavy drop operations, that was probably a good day. But when you peel this back of what it takes to do that joint forcible entry operation ×2, that's up between 150 and 160 platforms. Of the 14,000 parachutes that we have inside of our inventory, 8,000 of those have to be packed and ready to go at any given time. At any given time. That's 3,000 cargo parachutes and all the things that go with that as well. And then you would not think about it, but the expendables to ensure that that can happen is also there. General Kurla before me and we continue spent a lot of money bringing those capabilities from where we were 2 years ago to where we are today. And then there's the right training. What do you tell your soldiers? What do you tell your paratroopers to focus on every single day when you have a mission that truly is global and could be called to go at any point at any time? A lot of units have Big Fives. We have a Big 5+1. General Funk is going to talk a little bit about the mastery of the fundamentals and what it takes at that level. These are our R5. These are the ones that we collectively agreed upon inside of our formation that if we had to go tonight and we had to be able to do some things at absolutely the mastery level, these are the things that we have to do. It's tied to fitness, which we just talked about. It's tied to marksmanship, medical proficiency, battle drills, communication, shoot, move, communicate, protect, and sustain. But we've added the airborne proficiency, which is also a critical component for us. And it's not just the physical falling out of an airplane. That, relatively speaking, for anybody that's done it, is not that hard. But it's all the things that get you to inside of that aircraft. Knowing that 18-hour sequence, knowing the sequence that it takes to get you from alert to in the airplane to be ready to fight when you hit the drop zone has to be done over and over and over again. And if it's not, then when you actually get called into that airborne sequence, then you're thinking about the sequence versus what the actual crisis is on the other end. At the battalion and brigade level and the division level, we've kind of had to also focus because with a global mission, if you don't narrow that down just a little bit, you're really not going to be good at anything. So for us, obviously the joint forcible entry requirement is a big priority for us. The airborne assault airfield seizure, and there's a distinction between those two particular missions, but training to both to standard is very important for us. And then once we're there, unified land operations as part of a land component, combined arms maneuver inside of those formations, we still have that requirement to be campaign quality level division and below. But just as evidenced a couple weeks ago with Hurricane Florence, so the range of military operations, all crises aren't the high-end stuff. They aren't the high-intensity conflict. Sometimes it's humanitarian assistance. Sometimes it's support to civil authorities, and Hurricane Florence was a classic example of that. From FORSCOM to 18th Airborne Corps down through, and we had people coming from 10th Mountain. I know Walt Pyatt's in the room here somewhere, but Fort Stewart, people from all over the country pouring in to North Carolina to help with that particular crisis. But as they were on the way, the Global Response Force was stood up and ready to respond if necessary. So that's an example of, instead of lead, it was bread that we were potentially having to hand out on the other end. All that has to be tied to a very disciplined training and management cycle. For us, it's alert, it's training, and it's support. For decades, this has been refined, and we continue to refine it because every time we deploy a brigade, that 9-battalion cycle between what we call the Global Response Battalion 1 through 9 changes every time you pull an element out of that equation. But traditionally, the 1 through the 3, they were the ones on alert. The 4, 5, and 6, they were the ones doing an intensive training cycle. And then the 7 was doing the support. The 8 was going to school. They were taking leave. And the 9 was pushing the 1 in the event that you had to do that. That system works like magic. It's incredibly powerful if it's done over and over again. But like I said, the minute that you pull an element from there, you've got to relook that cycle. And we are going to have to review that next summer when one of our brigades unplugs from that equation. So how do you do that? It is through that disciplined battle rhythm and that disciplined training management. The last thing I'll cover, and before I cede my time here, is not only is it the training management component, but we have a campaign plan as well. The fight tonight, that is largely what we just discussed here, but tomorrow's fight. General Kurilla put into place, and we continue those innovation councils, because there's not just the thing that could happen tonight, but what about next year and the year beyond that? If we're not constantly thinking about our enemy and what needs to happen, what needs to be out there, both from a training and equipping perspective, then we're not going to be where we need to be. Closely linked now to the cross-functional teams, in particular the network cross-functional team, the mobility cross-functional team, and the soldier lethality. In fact, the integrated tactical network that Pete Gallagher and his team are working with our crew started in one of the battalions inside the 82nd, which was taken from our soft brothers that were out there. But taking great ideas that already exist, refining it for a conventional type organization, passing that back to a cross-functional team who now has the resources and the intellectual rigor to perfect this thing, coming back, getting that soldier feedback on how to improve it for the next go-around, and then eventually doing something bigger for the Army. Paratrooper life and America's Guard of Honor, for us, anytime you have something a little bit special, there are times and occasions when people will question why you need that capability. And so not only people that are in the formation, but outside the formation, living that for the rest of their life, because we have to have those right people, is critically important for us. And that brand of America's Guard of Honor today and tomorrow and through our 101-year history. And with that, I'll pass it to Courtney, and I look forward to your questions.
Thanks, Jim. So thanks to AUSA and General Richardson. Thank you, ma'am. After 15 years of operational deployments, the National Guard is more ready and lethal than any time in our history. And I'll talk mostly about the units in my state, Indiana, that I'm familiar with, but I'll tell you that the readiness and lethality is similar, and a lot of my friends, adjutants, generals, are out here, and they have the same effort on readiness and lethality in their respective states. There's many reasons for this increase, and the first is a training strategy that includes the exportable training combat or training capability, XCTC. It's a precursor, if you will, a train up for the CTC, an increase to 4 CTC rotations a year, warfighter exercises, gunnery, weapons training, and live fires. And we certainly could not do this. A shout out to my teammates at 1st Army. We certainly could not do this without Div East and Div West and their great TSBs. And so thanks a lot for being here and for all your help carrying us. Associate Unit Program. Across the total force. We have one in Indiana. We have an infantry battalion associated with 225 Infantry. They are the 3rd Maneuver Battalion for 2nd Brigade Combat Team of the 25th. And I talked to General Clark a couple days ago just to get his cut, you know, do you think it's worthwhile? How's it going? And he said in terms of lethality, that brigade only has 2 battalions without AUP. And the 1st Battalion, 151st, is absolutely integrated and part of his team. that fills out 225 to a full BCT. That brigade will be prepared to do a battalion live fire at CTC. They did company live fires at Lightning Forge just a couple months ago and are ready for a battalion live fire at JRTC. One of the ways that we've accomplished this is General Cadavy, Director of the Army National Guard, has authorized 100% of the authorization for the full-time manning for the associate units. So typically we're funded at about 60 to 65% of the authorization for full-time manning. General Cadavy has authorized the AUP units to be at 100%. So at a battalion level, that's about 15 people. That's about 2 extra officers or NCOs at the company level and about 5 at the battalion level. And this is critical when you increase op tempo to achieve a higher level of readiness. You have to have an increase in full-time manning, and that's made a difference, and it's obvious. The National Guard is deploying about 20,000 soldiers per year in operational deployments. An Armor Brigade, Division Headquarters, Sustainment Brigade, and OSS Brigade across battalions to Europe. And these deployments build readiness versus consume readiness because our formations are able to train to their combat tasks during the deployment. State Partnership Program, roughly 75 long-term relationships. Indiana has a 25-year relationship with Slovakia and a 2-year relationship now with the country of Niger. Very different relationships between the two. In Slovakia, we do high-level exercises with, where we'll send a battalion headquarters over and exercise with their mechanized brigade. In Niger, they're asking us to put together a basic training program for their infantry soldiers. These relationships build partner capacity and increase lethality across the coalition. As General Richardson alluded to, holistic health and fitness is critical. About 2 years ago, when we looked at our PT, embarrassing enough, we were at about 58% pass rate. And the challenge for us is when a soldier is flagged for height, weight, PT, we can't send them to school, we can't promote them, we can't re-enlist them. It crushes our senior grade readiness. So it was a major problem for us. We've done a lot to get after that. We're currently at 71% pass rate. There's been a huge investment in medical readiness from the Army and National Guard Bureau. The force is about 92% MRC 1 and 2, and less than right around 1% MRC 4. Leaves around 6 to 8%, 7% MRC 3. In Indiana, that's split between a third musculoskeletal, a third behavioral health, and a third every other category that there is. And so we're getting after specifically the musculoskeletal and trying to affect those. Our focus on fitness, we've built a Army Wellness Center. There's 37 in the Army. There's one at Camp Atterbury. We now have 3 of those, one up in Lawrence, where the 76th Brigade headquarters is, and one up in South Bend, in order to distribute that capability to our force, which is distributed across the state. We've also got, for those soldiers that are within 12 to 24 months of their ETS, if they're failing height, weight, or PT, instead of doing collective training for their annual training with their unit, they attend a Life Fit 15-day program, which is fitness education, nutrition based to teach them how to achieve a healthy lifestyle. We are having huge success with this. And the challenge is if I don't get them then they're going to ETS because I can't re-enlist them. So we take that cost, take them out of the collective training with their unit and send them to Life Fit. We've also added a resilience campus focused on providing services and resources to service members and families as a preventive action across all the pillars of resilience as part of the holistic health and fitness. More specific on the lethality part, the 76th Brigade Combat Team just finished Pacific Pathways 18.2 with tremendous success. Over the last 3 years, they did an XCTC training event. They did a brigade level FTX for about 6 days that was additive to the training schedule. They went to JRTC, and that includes all the battalion and brigade level battle staff, LTPs, BCBST, all those additional training events that go into the battle staff side. They got to platoon level live fire prior to JRTC and did company level live fire at JRTC. They also emphasized cyber defense as a critical task in JRTC, and had tremendous success not allowing a intrusion into their network. Pathways, I talked to General Brown yesterday. The 76th Brigade really knocked it out of the park. And I would say it's that training over a 3-year period that helped them be prepared for that. They had exercises in Australia, Indonesia, Hawaii, and Japan. It's about 90 days for the brigade headquarters, and then 3 weeks each for each of the battalions into those other exercises. 151st, associated with 225, their focus has been on live fire so they could conduct a battalion level live fire. This is a monumental effort to get to battalion live fire, and they basically have done nothing else during the training year other than focus on weapons and live fire. They did Lightning Forge over in Hawaii, and we'll do JRTC next month. And as I mentioned, General Clark, he mentioned he was out checking units at Lightning Forge. Came across 151. Of course, they wear the 25th patch, like all the battalions in 225. He did not realize that that was an AUP unit because it's one of his own. Let me address some of the costs and trade-offs in building this readiness. So the 76th Brigade over the last 3 years, at the battalion staff, brigade staff, company team leadership level, those National Guardsmen did 90 to 94 days of training per year. That is not sustainable in our model. So I recently had a 15-year top-level KD major, high executive with Amazon, punched out. She says, I'm not going to do it halfway, so I'm getting out. And it breaks my heart. Our model can't sustain 90 days year in and year out. And so the training model was 54 days, but the leaders did 90. And so what we have to do is we have to manage purse tempo and some events the leaders may not do, so that we can make sure that we can sustain the force over time. On my slide, very simple, but the pyramid focuses, I use this to say that individual training is the foundation for readiness and lethality. And for us, when you consider the new ACFT, preparation and training, other holistic health and fitness, individual weapons qual, crew serve weapons qual, driver's training, only 1 day of mandatory training events. Thank you to the Army for reducing those requirements, but it's still 1 day. 23 days out of a 39-day schedule is at the individual level. That leaves me 13 days to focus on squad and platoon. I probably have to trade off in year 1 and 2 the live fire, platoon live fire. If I do platoon live fire in year 1 and 2, then it prevents me from getting platoon STXs and to maneuver training that I think provides better leader development for the formation. On the let's see, I guess up here it's on the right, shows the training days in the various years of both a 5-year model of the infantry brigade and a 4-year model. So for my state, 39, 39, 48 and a half, 54 if you're in a CTC year, and then back to 39. I will tell you we did more than that every year. So individual consumes about 60%. We do PHA and records review, the fitness training and testing. For the 13 days at squad and platoon, we're really looking at the squad STX and live fire, buddy team live fire, and platoon STX, and take risk on the platoon live fire in years 1 and 2. This model also includes aggressive battle staff training program with CPXs and warfighter in year 3. In year 3, when we get an increase in training days, we would move to company maneuver and either a battalion FTX or platoon/company live fire. That's the trade-off. The trade space is whether a higher echelon maneuver training, which I prefer, and deferring live fire to post-mob, or foregoing the maneuver training and trying to focus on live fire. There's not universal agreement on which is better. I like the maneuver side. But the excessive burst tempo is a threat to our force. And I've implemented controls in Indiana. 16 SRM model, 39, 39, 54, 39, plus 15 days can be approved by the brigade commander. 16 days and 25 greater than SRM has to go to the first flag officer. And if a soldier is in excess of 25 days over their SRM model, that approval is going to come to me, because I can't sustain that level of burst tempo because I'm hemorrhaging company grade officers and NCOs. As part of the operational total force in the primary combat reserve of the Army National Guard is focusing on building readiness, continuing to focus on that training that makes us ready to go to combat and provide lethal ready forces to the combatant commanders. So with that, I'll turn that over to General Funk. Sir, thank you.
All right, thanks, Courtney, and thanks to AUSA. So my name's Funk, and I'm a Phantom Warrior, and it's great to be here this morning and to talk to all of you. My job is to get trained and ready now. America's Hammer, the counterattack force that is ready to go at a moment's notice, where we are, in fact, ready to support wherever the GRF goes and gets in trouble, Jim. Just thought I'd let you know.
Thanks, sir.
All right, but on a serious note, our job is actually to bring the hammer, so that's what we get to do. And most recently, I had the privilege of leading the Combined Joint Task Force in Iraq and Syria with 74 nations and 5 organizations and just recently returned with a great team that actually put that together. So, and some of them are in the room today, so I want to publicly thank them and say thanks for everything they've done. You know, I will tell you, as the most recent deployee, or in fact, most recent guy that has actually had to put in effect the operational force, I'll tell you that our training strategy is working. I can give you multiple examples. For example, I had an artillery battalion from a National Guard unit come through RSOI, through great Mike Garrett sitting here in the front row, through his 3rd Army, get ready through the RSOI process, and within 6 hours in combat, firing artillery rounds against an enemy that was very determined. That's why all this matters. That's what it means. That's why this be ready now is in fact the case, because we have to be able to apply our will throughout the depth and breadth of the globe. That's what we get paid to do. I think that we can achieve the operational effects. I watch the operational effects being achieved in the CENTCOM AOR every day. And by the way, we had to do that by, with, and through a partner in both Iraq and Syria. And here in a couple of minutes, I'll show you the complexity of what it is that we were up against and why that matters, and how our current training strategy at our training centers, which are our leadership laboratories, why that is important, why this crucible that Jim, I think, talked about at the CTCs matters so much. And it is because the complexity on the battlefield today is immense. And it is growing, it changes. Our adversaries don't want to take us on point to point, face to face. They know we have the most lethal forces in the world, infantry, cavalry, you name it, they know that. So where do they want to take us on? They take us on the edges, in the information space, in the EW world, in the electromagnetic spectrum. So we got to be ready for that too. And those are part of these complexities. And if anybody's interested, I'll hit a little bit of that later on. Multiple iterations matter. We are doing these readiness exercises, these deployment readiness exercises that General Richardson talked about, because we have to be able to apply that force. It is working. That force is ready. Our guys understand what it means to put the force together, get it through a reception, staging, onward movement, integration program, and apply combat power across the spectrum. They understand what that means. That's why it's important. That's why any means of transportation matters. I watched our great special operation force working hand in glove with a partner in Syria who are doing amazing work by, with, and through their partners, applying joint effects across the force to include lethal and non-lethal effects that they're trying to achieve. That also matters, and it matters because we are fundamentally training together again, and we're using multiple iterations, and we're bringing the heavy and the light force back together again, and we're not separating them where you go to JRTC and you go to NTC and neither the two shall meet. These light-heavy formations and putting the effect we're trying to achieve. That's what is in the power of our great joint force. I watched a deterrent piece where we put a Marine force in, showed what their capabilities were to do live fire, and then brought a National Guard HIMARS battery in to show what we could do with long-range precision fires. All in the space in an information environment where we said, don't do this. This is what our capability is, to send the message that we are ready now. But we also got to be, and fortunately for all of you, that we have Catherine Dale here to tell us why it really matters. I will just tell you, those things are working. Just bring up what's happening in the battle space across. Bring up the complexity slide for just a minute. Okay, I want you to see some of the words on this slide right here. I want you to understand what this means. Not only do you have your partners in conflict between the KRG and the GOI, the Kurdish Regional Government, and the government of Iraq, but you also have a counterinsurgency building. You have a multi-domain warfare where you're getting an information effect, an EW effect, and some sort of a GPS jamming effect. You have, and that's just in Iraq. Not only that, you have major combat operations happening. You have a collapse of an enemy force and a pursuit that's going on across a nation in contact. And then you have on the other side a partner force, not a non-state actor, trying to govern and bring two things. And this all boils down to two things, as a matter of fact, in both Iraq and Syria. In Syria, it boils down to hope. Syrian people believe that they have hope in northeast Syria because of the effects that we're bringing across the joint force. And the Iraqi forces believe that they have returned honor to their nation. That's why it's working. That's why it matters. That's why our training program is so important. We apply these kinds of lessons at our training centers. We're doing it now at home station. We have the ability now to do virtual live constructive and gaming technologies and apply multiple iterations across these types of complexities. Most of that, you notice, is not in fact kinetic. Most of it's on the outsides, on the fringes. But it is in a constant churn. So as you work your way through this piece, and you look at the coalition nation's will, people ask me, what's different? I also had the opportunity to go back to, I was the CJ commander before I was the CJTF commander. In 14, when I got to Iraq in 14, 3rd Army had set the conditions. We came in, just as our doctrine says, took over the fight from them. But at that point, at that time, that was a nation defeated. That was an army in rout. They had been routed. And they'll tell you that. And how do you reestablish that? Tough, demanding training. You've got to be right there with them. And this is led by a coalition. And by the way, And most of you know Tony Grinston. He's the one that designed the training program we're still using there today, the Force Command Sergeant Major. And in that, what that did was bring confidence, because why do we train? To provide ourselves confidence in ourselves, our leaders, our equipment, and our doctrine, right? Well, we applied that by, with, and through another nation. And it takes time. You can't do this stuff overnight. So the building of readiness of someone else's army is almost as important as building your own. But they recognize, at least in Iraq and the Syrian Democratic Force, they all recognize that we have the experts in training. Our young non-commissioned officers and officers are tremendous. So our training strategy is working. How do we have to do it? We have to do the things that Courtney's talking about, where we got to apply the effects of the total force, because everybody's got to be ready, and everybody's got to build to this, and everybody's got to understand where it is we're going, because we never know where it is we're going to try to apply this combat power and actually oppose the will of a mandate from whatever organization we happen to be part of. So, I think I'll leave it there, throw it open, but you are in for a big treat, because Catherine's next, and she will tell you why the strategic concepts matter. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, General Funk. I would like to add my own warm thanks to AUSA and to General Abrams and to General Richardson for the chance to be part of this panel discussion about readiness and lethality. My piece of this story is the bigger picture. What are the implications of our Army's increased readiness and lethality for our friends, our enemies, and also ourselves? So I'll take these in turn. First of all, for our potential adversaries, our increased readiness and lethality are about our ability to close with and destroy the enemy, and they are also about deterring potential adversaries so that we don't have to fight in the first place. So that raises two fundamental questions. First of all, how much is enough? The potential adversary that I know best is Russia. No one in Moscow right now is eager and waiting to roll tanks across the border. They don't want a fight as a first choice. But our strategic interests do not coincide. They started the fight after all. We are understanding each other less and less well, and someone could easily miscalculate. In fact, that risk is growing all the time. So we have to be prepared. What's interesting and important is that Russia recognizes real warfighting capability. So when we put 4 battle groups, enhanced forward presence out in Eastern Europe, great soldiers on the ground, but they don't yet have enablers or air or command and control so that we know who's going to fight them, Russia's defense community looks over and collectively shrugs their shoulders. When we ourselves struggle to roll units into Europe or to move around in Europe once we're there, Russia sees vulnerabilities and they see opportunities. They are watching us very closely. We do not get to choose when we communicate. We all love to get up on Distinguished Visitor Day at big exercises and communicate our message, but potential adversaries are watching everything that we say and that we do. So that makes the deterrence part of readiness and lethality. To make that really work, we've got to be ready and lethal. We also have to be able to get to the fight. We've got to be able to sustain the fight once we're there, and we've got to demonstrate those things in a very clear way. The other key question as we think about potential adversaries is how much is too much? And I'll tell you what that means. Is there some danger that potential adversaries look over at our Army and its growing readiness and lethality and misinterpret that as a signal that we are getting ready to launch? The key is above the Army's pay grade. It's clear and consistent communication at the strategic level that we're not looking for a fight. At the strategic level, we do have certain expectations. we're also open to the possibility of constructive collaboration when that might actually make sense. Now again, delivering that message is a strategic level responsibility. The message carries weight because it's got the Army's strength to back it up. The bottom line for our potential adversaries is that what is important is our readiness and lethality and also our responsiveness under the umbrella of clear communications at the strategic level. For our allies and partners, and first of all, let me just say, it is awesome to see how many folks are here in this room and at AUSA in general from allied and partner nations. That is really encouraging and just simply good in its own right. Our strategic guidance, as we think, emphasizes the importance of alliances and partnerships. It does say that we, the U.S., will protect our interests. We would act alone if we needed to, but it is just about impossible to imagine that we would fight a war all on our own in the future. Simply starting with the territory where we would fight, facing access and overflight, to the political decisions that launch a war or that bring it to a close. So it's a thought experiment, because I was asked to be provocative up to a point. Let's look at a few things that could potentially go wrong. First of all, mixed political signals. As we grow our readiness and lethality, some allies and partners, again, might think, great, fantastic, we're off the hook. We don't need to invest as much in our own defense. Or even worse, some allies and partners might think that we, the US, we're doubling down on our own capabilities. That must mean we're backing away from our commitments to do things together. They might even begin to seek alternative security arrangements. And that would be genuinely a bad thing. So the best mitigation, again, is clear and consistent communication at the strategic level about our national enduring commitment to work with and to stand with our allies and partners. And that's backed up by the things that we do in practice, like, for example, the terrific state partnership program that General Carr mentioned in his own remarks. Second, interoperability, something a lot of us are thinking about a lot. As technological sophistication grows, a question to ask is, are we making it harder for at least some of our allies and partners to keep up, given what they can afford and given what we allow them to buy? Well, the best answer to this is to actually get more specific, to think through in a detailed way what kinds of interoperability we actually need and how much of it and with whom. The right answer is not simply the more the better. We need to figure that out and then apply and make sure that we've got what we need. And the third piece, as we think about allies and partners, is accountability. And this one is a little bit sensitive. For example, here's a good thing. The NATO Readiness Initiative is really good news. That is a spur to holding ourselves accountable. But I'll tell you, it doesn't make it easier to do the hardest thing, which is to take a hard look at yourself and say, hey, we've got these gaps in our own readiness, and I'd like to tell all the rest of you about it. Or to go to training and exercise events that are designed to make clear what those gaps are. So we've got to do some hard thinking, I think, about how we hold ourselves accountable with respect for national sensitivities, also with great seriousness of purpose. The bottom line for our allies and partners, our increased Army readiness and lethality is great good news. It contributes directly to what we can do as an overall combined land force. Our work is an invitation to everyone else. Come join us, be part of this. So third and finally, it's turning the lens on ourselves. It is hard to see yourself. Candidly, right now, here in this moment, it's a little bit hard to see all of you.
Exactly.
But it's even harder. It's even harder to see yourself with any accuracy or insight. So as a thought experiment, as we double down on our own readiness and lethality, what could go wrong? Well, one question, for example, might be, what happens if our defense budget climate changes considerably? Probably still need to be ready and lethal, but if we see that coming, what does that do to our sense of urgency? A second example, what does this mean for our joint force, right? So how can the Army best make sure that its own solutions fit into and inform what the rest of the joint force is doing, especially as we all get smarter together about multi-domain operations. This only works. The storyline is only convincing and compelling if our Congress and our allies and partners and our potential adversaries hear the same thing from all of us. And third, and this one's hard, what are we missing, right? What, if anything, that we actually care about might we be less prepared for if we look at the world through the lens of readiness and lethality? Maybe there's not anything there, but maybe some of those things might include, who's got the human domain, the part of it that we're not closing with and destroying, and many of the things that General Funk talked about, what happens to those pieces? Are we prepared for all of the clever and asymmetrical things that our adversaries will direct against us? Again, General Funk gave us some great examples. They're going to play to win, not to lose. So what's that going to look like? And third, for example, what will be the impact of our own generational differences? So when I look around this room and this panel, see lots of folks who've all have years in Iraq and Afghanistan together. We have a single shared frame of reference in an incredibly powerful way. What happens when we don't have that anymore? Bottom line for ourselves, we may be exactly on the right track, but it's worth doing some imagining. If we cannot imagine what could go wrong with all of this, then we're not imagining hard enough. Just one final word. My bottom line for this whole discussion would be yes and. Growing the Army's readiness and lethality is great good news for the Army, for our potential adversaries, for all of our friends. And we need to do even more than that. We've got to ensure our responsiveness as well as our readiness. We have to integrate all of our efforts in both the joint and combined fight. And we've got to work on both now and the future. The backdrop for all of this is constantly moving, and the pace is likely to continue to surprise us. I'll stop there, and I also really look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Dale, and fellow panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm Colonel Phil Sonia, and I'll help facilitate the dialogue with our distinguished panel. Please notice the 4 microphones located in the aisles, and you can start queuing at those now in order to ask your questions. In asking your questions, I'll ask you to do the following. First, please state your name and the organization that you represent. Second, if there's a panel member who you'd like to address a question directly to, please state that immediately after identifying yourself. Third, as you address your questions along to the panelists, please ensure that they're along the vein of the discussion. And fourth, please broadcast your voice and enunciate your questions, as we are live streaming this event and recording it on Divids. And we want to ensure that the entire audience is able to gain insights developed this morning. With that in mind, please queue up and provide your questions.
Awesome.
All right. It's pretty quiet questions.
Not time.
Good morning. Lieutenant Colonel John Gwynn from ForceCom. Sir, General Mingus, this question is for you, sir. You spoke about how mobility increases lethality for the airborne. Can you talk a little bit about some of the 80 Seconds initiatives, such as those with your organic aviation assets, and how that's going to change the fight in the future for the 82nd?
If you walk around the floor out here, you'll see things called razors, daggers, GMVs. The JLTV, the MATVs, and all the other ones that are out there that protected us for years in Iraq and Afghanistan. For us, going back to the expeditionary mindset, global response force mission, we almost have to have an arms room concept depending on where we're going. We've got to have the protection, mobility, and firepower if we're going to go to Iraq or Afghanistan. But if we're going to the jungles of Panama, or if we're going to someplace else where we need a little less protection, but we still need mobility, we still need firepower, we have other options available to us to be able to give us that limited mobility and firepower once we get to where we're going. But on the reverse side of that too, we got to be able to get home. And so internal loading, sling loading, being able to get back inside of an aircraft on the back end of a mission in a very, very rapid manner is very important to us as well. So it's not just getting in, doing the mission, but it's also being able to collapse that if there isn't a relief in place. If it is something short duration, we'd have to be able to very rapidly collapse, put that stuff back into our organic assets, that either by rotary wing or Air Force fixed wing, and then get it home.
Thanks, sir.
Good morning, Colonel Mark Hoffmeister from the Army Engineer School. Questions for the full panel. As we focus our efforts on both squad lethality and our divisional readiness, what are some of your thoughts on how we ensure aligned investment in echelon above brigade formations to ensure their interoperability and readiness of those critical combat enablers that are operating integrated into those forward formations?
As the only Corps commander on the panel, I will tell you that I worry about the above brigade formations because they have to have the same programs. And we need to turn our focus and attention onto those kinds of things. For example, the engineer brigade that I have at 3rd Corps, the 36th, they have recently done an EJRI where they took their bridge assets, went to Fort Riley and did a bridge exercise crossing a wet gap crossing in multiple forms of contact, through multiple forms of contact, and did a tremendous job doing it. The 75th Fires was just in Iraq and Syria with me, and where they did EJRIs in combat. So we have to apply that same task to our above echelon brigades, because everybody's got to be ready now. Seriously, the total force has to be ready now.
So I'd also like to say that in all of the Headquarters Department of the Army requirements, Oversight Council, the AROC, the ACBs, all of these different forums that we do and look at, all of the portfolios that the echelons above brigade are always considered in terms of the modernization, so that we don't leave an entity behind as we're trying to modernize something else, and then we don't think of the other part, critical part, that we need to modernize as well. So rest assured that you're always considered in that.
Yeah, the focus on the fundamental tasks of what it is you're supposed to be able to do in combat, it goes a long way to making sure that everybody's ready.
Gentleman in the rear.
My name is Staff Sergeant James Turner. I'm with Installation Management Command, but I'm Intel by trade. My question is for General Mingus and General Funk. General Mingus, you discussed the fight tonight, but also looking at the fight ahead. However, traditionally, we do talk doctrinally that intel drives operations. Unfortunately, at the tactical and far too often the operational level, operations drive intel requirements. My question for both of you gentlemen is, what efforts are you actually going through to try to take us back to intelligence driving operations in your future plans?
Well, I'll just give one vignette because we just did it a couple weeks ago, but that Global Response Force forum that we host every quarter. It was initially, for the first year or so, all about building capability across FORCECOM and the Army for all those units that are not just inside the 82nd, but to bring all the host of capabilities required. And it used to just be like a USR where, okay, here's where I'm at with my people, my training equipment. But it really didn't get into this idea of being able to go anywhere in the world very, very rapidly and respond. So a couple months ago, they started, we did it again this last time, but we start each one with a vignette of a different place in the world. Places that you wouldn't think about, but might be on the verge of having something going on. And we have the intel folks kind of tee up all the considerations, all the things that are going on from either PAMISI or from one of the other kind of factors that we look at these various locations around the world. We allow the GREF units then to go back and think about that for a couple of months. And then they come back to the forum, and the lead-in discussion as part of these is to talk about, hey, this is what we believe we would have to do to get ready to go to this particular location to deal with that crisis. And it's been pretty powerful because when you get a postal company and an IBCT talking about going to, say, South Sudan or wherever, you know, it brings a whole different level of discussion to get to your question about how we're getting intel driving ops.
You know, it goes back to repetition. I added the 504th MI brigade to my warfighter because I believe they're a core unit and they should be training with the Corps. They used as a separate, that doesn't necessarily always equate to what it is we're trying to get done. It's reattaching, it's getting multiple iterations, it's understanding that ISR does not mean unmanned aerial vehicles. Intelligence is a warfighting function, surveillance is an activity, and reconnaissance is a mission. Consequently, we got to get back to that kind of fighting for our information, fighting for intelligence, understanding what our cavalry outfits do. And then we will, in fact, have a focus on intel driving maneuver.
Sir?
Scott Miller, Colonel retired. I'm at the Hellenic chapter of AUSA in Athens, Greece. My question is largely for the whole panel. It's a follow-on to the discussion on how our adversaries see us and as a deterrent, our relationship with our partners. And so I'm a foreign area officer by trade. I've been observing kind of this dynamic for 12 years. And it seems we do a lot of effort to try and sustain our relationships and partnerships, but we still have this ever-increasing capability gap that is a real problem for our allies to keep track. I mean, we've got limited defense budget, but ours completely dwarfs everybody else's. And so they want to spend their money wisely. We want them to be on U.S. equipment, be integrated with U.S. systems, be integrated with U.S. way of warfare. And yet we still have this division that grows. And I'm curious on your thoughts on either what's underway on how to try and stem that trend, and or any other thoughts you may have on that, because I think it's a very serious issue. We need our friends and allies. We need to create interdependencies, and interdependencies means we have to be dependent on them for things as well. And we've got to tell our allies very clearly what those niche capabilities we want them to specialize in are. And so I don't know if you have any thoughts on any of these comments, but I think it's very important to deter our adversaries, to show that our alliances are very, very strong.
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's actually a panel on interoperability tomorrow, which Catherine alluded to a little bit, and I'm sitting on. But having just led the coalition over there, I will tell you that that is a constant concern of mine, because you're right. We can outpace. We can out PowerPoint. We can out just about anybody, anything, because we don't always take into effect what our allies and partners are trying to get done. I think that it's critical, as you said, to make sure we can build systems that allow us to interoperate. Our biggest problem, however, is training, and it's training in our foreign disclosure officers. What can you share? What can't you share? What's secret? What's not secret? And overclassification. To be, some of you are probably students of history here. Unfortunately, our history for the last 17 years is going to be incredibly difficult to tell. We've been in the longest war in our nation's history. We've classified just about everything, and guess what? It'll take forever. It'll take decades to declassify the information to be able to provide it for the future. Get back to your partners' question and allies. We're starting to do exercise. For example, my warfighter in April of this year will have the 3rd UK division fighting with us. So we have to be able to communicate, obviously. So we're working our way through all those pieces as well. There are capabilities that our allies and partners bring that we don't have. Much better permissions. What we have to do as the Army or as leaders of the Joint Force is understand the permissions and applications that they have with their equipment and authorities and national caveats that allow us to take advantage of that stuff.
2 words. Love everything that General Funk said, naturally. Great question, because we need our allies and partners for 2 reasons that don't reduce to each other. And one is the political message of our unity, and the other is real capabilities that need to be part of the fight. And those are both important, and it's not just one or the other. Our potential adversaries see whether that's working or not. We demonstrate it all the time. They pay attention to small things. And that means, I think, one thing that you suggest is the great clarity in our messages. The message can't be everything, right? We've got to be careful with our asks so that they're calibrated in the context of any given ally or partner's defense white papers and strategy and vision. Because if we're unrealistic, then the whole message is lost. That's a practical thing that we can work on. I couldn't agree more about training. There's something to be said, not just for training like we fight, but training like we fight together, right? Which is something that we do a whole bunch of for many years in Europe and Germany, at Graf and Hohenfels, can do more of here at both home stations and CTC rotations. What does that look like as we think about specifically what kind of interoperability we need and how much? So great that there's a great panel tomorrow. Come to that.
I was incredibly impressed with some of our European forward surgical team capabilities, which we are lagging in as the U.S. force. They can apply world-class care at the leading edge of the battlefield. We can too, but it is terribly harder because where our sets, kits, and outfits aren't in the right place, in the right positions.
Just one last comment on that overall. I mean, there are capabilities that reside within our allied forces. If we're very clear on the things we want them to do specifically, whether it's, for example, in Europe, if it's bridging, if there's a shortfall in bridging, we need to be very clear to an ally, hey, we want you to be our go-to for bridging, for example. If we're clear like that, there's a very good chance our allies will put their resources against those requirements. And it shows an interdependence that shows trust. You can't surge trust. They have to know that we're dependent on them just as much as they're dependent on us.
Yep.
And if we can do that, then we can do a lot of things together.
I agree.
Thanks.
Ma'am.
Good afternoon. I just want to say my name is Robin Landry. I'm retired Air Force Colonel. I am also working for the Joint Improvised Threat Defeat Organization, formerly known as JIDO. We're recently under DETRA. And I've done a lot of joint work, so I'm an admirer of the Army. And of course, my father was in the Army. And but I wanted to say this. The first thing about the whole panel, I'm very impressed with the fact that we're looking at human factors to ensure we increase our readiness. And that should be something all of the services do. And the other thing, I do agree with you, General Funk, that we do have too many rules and regulations in the ways of sharing information. I'm a retired intelligence officer too, so, and that's something we struggle with at JIDO because we work with our Five Eye partners and other coalition partners, and we want to rapidly give them information as quickly as we can. My question is, I work as an intelligence officer with our S&T folks within the J6. And I'm sure a lot of the Army folks here are used to JIDO capabilities, our catapult, big data analytic platform. I also go to a lot of technical conferences, and one thing I didn't hear here, and I'm sure you guys are aware of it, is a concept that I saw at DARPA, their STO, called mosaic warfare. And mosaic warfare is a network approach to using our various military equipments and systems to do war rather than a system of systems approach. And it's supposed to increase lethality, resiliency, and all the things that you all are saying. And it's a new way of using autonomous vehicles and autonomous equipment. And I know the Army is into the kind of UAS stuff. How do we maintain our readiness, what our soldiers traditionally do, and sort of move into this new era of sort of asymmetric warfare with our current systems across the services, and do that quickly? How do we keep you all at this, with this great plan that you have, if we move into this era of mosaic warfare?
It's a great question, and fortunately for you, Jim Mingus is here.
I just want to know, because I write papers for General Bentley,
Yeah,
and
okay.
I need to make sure I know what I'm talking about.
Well, Jim commanded the Mission Command Center of Excellence too, so I'm going to let him answer that question.
Let me make sure I even understand the question. Mosaic is one of the.
It's
can I
at
pull up my
DARPA,
phone
sir,
and look
so
at
I
it?
want to know, because we had a number of Army, I retired graybeards,
yeah.
and they're wonderful. And this is a concept that was at the DARPA D60.
Yeah.
And so I am writing papers, and I'm sort of leveraging your expertise to help me, if you don't mind.
That's where you get the right guy.
I don't know about that. But I'll take a stab at it.
Yes, sir.
One of the things we're trying to, and I think as an Army, we, for 17 years, we were a BCT-centric modular Army. And we were very reluctant to break up the modularity of that brigade combat team. But as we think about multi-domain operations, cross-domain maneuver, if we think about the threats of the future, if we cannot dynamically re-task organize and organize ourselves, and I don't know what the answers are, but if we don't have the ability to do that based on the threat that is presented to us, to find where those seams and gaps are, to take advantage of what the enemy may give us, then we're gonna fall short. we probably don't use that exact term. At least I'm not unfamiliar with the word, but in terms of Army lexicon, using that throughout the force. But the ability to be dynamic and agile and pull a force together, not just the people, but the equipment and capabilities that you need to deal with a particular problem set, that is actually something that we are getting better at every day. And going back to our specific mission with the Global Response Force, and I alluded to a couple of, but you would be surprised at the units across the Army that are on that. And it is, as General Abrams says all the time, you guys are a menu of choices for, so it could be Hurricane Florence, it could be the Ebola crisis in Africa. How do you rapidly pull together a task force, organized force that has the capability to go forward and accomplish that mission in a very rapid manner? So I think that's kind of what you're getting after. But the frequency in which you do that is going to drive, really how good you are. And that's why we continue to have the forums we do. So I don't know if that kind
No,
of
I think it's a concept that's going to be maturing with DARPA and the STO. But I just want to make sure that you all were aware of it and that it was widely well received. I mean, they had a really great panel there, and I thought it had great implications for joint war fighting and also fighting with our coalition partners as well.
A critical piece that I think is going to help us do this in a much more rapid fashion, if you think about the pick a crisis, pick a place, especially if it's not something that we are thinking about every day. The learning curve to get yourself to understanding and knowledge of whatever that particular crisis is usually the biggest hurdle to get a unit ready to go. And so with the advent of artificial intelligence and machine learning that has a lot of this data that's out there that can take it from just raw that, which is data, and bring us up to a much higher level of understanding in a more rapid fashion, then one, I think that leads to better decisions up front, tailoring a force to be able to go do what you need to do, thus being able to happen in a much more rapid fashion. And I know that you guys work that. There's a lot of entities throughout the Army that are trying to figure out how do we incorporate the tools of artificial intelligence into our decision making without replacing the human to make that much more effective.
Yeah, Dido, we're working on AI machine learning, and we've also been reaching out to the new Futures Command out in San Antonio so that we are working in partnership with, the Army and also the other services to make sure we're trying to do the right capabilities for everyone. But thank you, sir. I really appreciate it.
Good answer. Yeah.
Thank you.
Because I
Sir?
would have said
Thanks, sir.
operations.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Dan. I'm with the Strategy Bridge professional journal, and I'm interested in the perspectives of General Richardson, General Funk, and General Mingus on this question from each of your organizational levels. Given the reliance of the U.S. Army on technology today and the capabilities of our adversaries in terms of owning the information environment, what efforts are your organizations working to ensure the readiness and lethality of our forces in a degraded environment?
Good.
Yeah, so as I said in my remarks before, in terms of what we're doing at the combat training centers, both at the National Training Center and the Joint Readiness Training Center, the degraded communications environment. So if you're doing that at the collective level, at your premier event, you doggone better be sure you're training it at home station training. And what we often find is that still out at the CTC, the op tempo and the ability to keep up with all the moves that are made with the command nodes and that sort of thing really drives a relook back of what they could have done differently and trained this harder at home station training. So as we build upon that and we share those lessons learned, which is another great thing that we do in the Army, is that those lessons learned get put out to all of the other commands within Forces Command so they can get better at the home station training. And they don't have the ride-along programs that we have at the CTCs as well, which could be taken better advantage of. To see that before you're in the spot as a brigade commander or a battalion commander and you're out there trying to deal with the op tempo, it's the pace, It's the number of moves. It's that whole stressful environment where everything culminates, and you wish you'd maybe trained a little bit harder at home station. So, but that also requires that we have I'm glad to say that we have, for our training strategy, 100% of the funding for our training strategy. And so we weren't quite at 100%, and we've managed to get that in Forces Command for all of our units. And so that will start this year, and we're pretty excited about it. So I think General Funk wants to make a couple comments as well.
So I saw it from actually in this last operation where we were deployed, we competed and I do say competed, in a degraded environment every day. Every day. And in order to do that, what do you have to do? You have to rely on something called mission command. And you have to look your subordinates in the eye and say, hey, act. Here's what I need you to get done. This is the effect I want you to achieve in the battle space. Here are the tools. If you've gotten some sort of degraded mode, you still got to execute it. We train degraded mode gunnery in our tanks all the time. Tanks, Bradleys, howitzers. We go to conditions on the battlefield like NBC or Suburni, as we call them now. So those are the environments we're training in now. Those are still the fundamental. The tasks remain the same. The conditions may change, and the conditions upon which you're trying to apply that piece of combat power. So that I say you pick the 4 or 5 things, like Jim said, you have the big 5. You focus on the fundamentals, and then your mission command, your understanding, recognizing opportunity, and acting will carry the day. At the end of the day, your ability to apply combat power and be at the decisive point is what we all get paid to do.
Thanks, sir. I think there's really a parallel effort here. One is, if we go out tonight, we go with the digital systems and our communications and our mission command systems that we have right now. And so we cannot spend enough time training and getting better and better at using the systems that we have, because it is what it is. But without a doubt, as General Funk pointed out, we are going to operate, if it's a pacing threat or a peer competitor, in a disrupted, degraded, intermittent, and latent environment. And everybody knows about the PACE plan, the primary, alternate, contingency, and in extremis element that's out there. And every unit kind of lays out what their PACE plan is. But how much thought and effort, and how much do you really train with the C and the E? We typically put a lot of effort into our P and our A, the primary and the alternate, but we're not very good across the board when it comes to the others. In the environment that we're talking about right now that General Funk just lived, you've got to be an expert at all of those. And I couldn't agree with him more in terms of the mission command. When it is interrupted, when it is disrupted, mission command and that discipline initiative has to kick in. But you still have to fight to get that network back. You still have to fight to get those things, because you can very quickly go from disciplined initiative to uninformed, ill-disciplined initiative, where folks are kind of off the reservation, maybe well-intentioned, but not with inside the commander's intent. And then the other parallel effort is that there's some amazing stuff that the network cross-functional team and the others in the mission command business are working right now, whether it's different waveforms, how to hide signatures, how to mask signatures. If you walk the floor, there's some amazing stuff that our industry partners are working right now to be able to take those things that are out there with modulation and other kinds of technologies that continue to hide and mask. The enemy's still going to be looking for ways to defeat that too, but the good news is there's technology and there's things that are going on right now that are going to make our networks better and more resilient in the future.
One of the challenges we have is that at the CTC rotation, at the CTC centers, you might only get to go once a year, once every other year. And so the opportunity to actually experiment or develop TTPs is not great. And so it has to be home station. And I would offer the Army has another training center where you can create a degraded environment. Muscatatuck Urban Training Center, the most complex urban training center in the Army. You can go GPS denied, real life, yeah. Turn them off. And whether it's subterranean or whichever domains you want to operate within, you can create the degraded environment and experiment and work without being in the crucible of the CTC rotation with such high visibility and such rare opportunity to be able to achieve those training events.
So I think a real important point is the acting part that General Funk said. And so you have to, one, you have to train in the degraded environment in order to have trained how you're going to act within the commander's intent. Because, and we have one of our ARPS group commanders here from the Joint Readiness Training Center, Colonel Gardner, and so you can talk with him after this on what he sees. But, you know, when myself or General Abrams goes out to the training centers and we see, you know, the cav out there doing their thing and they lose comms, and then all of a sudden there's nothing. They had the advantage, and then they don't, and then because they didn't have the comms, they didn't act, and then they lost the momentum, and then they lost the advantage. And so definitely something that has to be trained at home station. But thank you for the question. You got a lot of folks to talk on that one.
Good morning, Major McAvoy. My question is, with the OSIT increasing to 22 weeks and the Army struggling to hit recruiting goals, it's been in the news lately, how is FORSCOM, the corps and divisions, looking at those associated future manning challenges in considering like the sustainable readiness model?
Well, yeah, first of all, I think personally, this is a Paul Funk thing, I think we need to sustain the current soldiers we have in. So we need to retain. And then I think we need to build off a Soldier for Life program that gives our kids the options, and so they understand what it means if you're going to get out in a job market that's got almost total employment, what it means if you're getting out, and what kind of qualifications and education you need. And I think if we use that kind of a tool, and through the total TAPS and then through the Soldier for Life program, I think if we use those kinds of tools, we will retain better troopers and continue our mission forward. That's the first thing. The second thing is, somebody hit it, and actually Courtney said it, was talking about the muscular and skeletal injuries and how we've changed our readiness centers, our gyms for us old people, and how we put our physical therapists in there and actually got after some of these things, and how we're looking at this, our diet programs in the dining facilities, and all those things build readiness. And so I think that's how you address it. Through reduction of injury, through retention of top quality people, through great programs that inform our soldiers on the decisions they're making, through educational processes that allow them to grow and live and function with their families in an environment that says, hey, we're going to take care of you, and all along the way, we're going to show you the options of staying with us and why it matters. Go ahead.
All three components missed their accession goals significantly this year. One of the things I would like to see from a National Guard perspective is in Soldier for Life and TAP is more of a focus on total force continuum. And so we've got great soldiers that want to do something else in the civilian world. Let's continue to have them serve in the reserve component, USAR or National Guard. Because they've been trained, we've invested a lot. I think we could put more emphasis in those programs to encourage folks to come over to Compo 2 and Compo 3 because we need those skilled soldiers.
At one point of emphasis there, the recruit of the year for the reserves and National Guard was from Fort Hood, Texas. Just thought I'd throw that out there.
So just one comment too, you know, we're all three compos are competing for the same population. And so yesterday, I'm sure a good part of you were sitting in I don't want to comment which forum it was because I've sat in so many, but the Secretary of the Army said everybody in the U.S. Army is a recruiter.
That's right.
And so really, I mean, when you think about the power of that, there's a lot of young people that we all know and that would do extremely well in the Army, and it's just a matter of talking to the young people about what they can accomplish in the Army, which is pretty incredible when you actually think about it and you think about your own careers and who got you interested in joining the Army as well. And so,
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
You know, it's about wearing the cloth of your nation. We got a bunch of coalition partners in here as well, and it is about that. It's about the ability wear the cloth to your nation and do something good for the world.
And sir, I know we have with the extended OSET, we also have an extended training period. Mr. Lethality, I'd like to get your thoughts on the expanded OSET program, what that may foretell for the Army and for increased retention plans as well.
So a lot of the challenges on the recruiting side are quantitative, but the challenges within the close combat formations, and I would argue every formation, is a mixture of quantitative and qualitative. I believe that there's great potential in using something besides ASVAB to measure the potential of folks that want to serve their nation. ASVAB is a blunt instrument in some regards. It is a very good measurement of can do. Can someone do the task? Can they do the skill? But it is not a measurement of will do. And I believe that we can take a more holistic view of the individual and expand into components of will do and combine the can do with will do to achieve that more holistic view. And I actually think it's an aperture opener rather than an aperture closer on the accession side. Number two, I think that we can use the same philosophy in MOS assignments. Heretofore, the department's efforts have again been largely quantitative. Are we getting the right numbers of people into the force? But there is a faces to spaces component of MOS assignment. There are attributes that individuals bring to the services that are more appropriate for different MOSs. Those attributes, when well matched, lead to job satisfaction. Job satisfaction leads to retention. Retention leads to relief from an accessions bill. And so the CCLTF is spending a significant amount of energy right now trying to get the best science to go beyond just somebody shows up at a recruiting station and they say, oh, you've got a 120 GCT. Fantastic. You're a future cryptological technician.
Take that.
Right? But I want to be in the infantry. Oh, no, you don't. You want to be a cryptological technician, right? Because that's a hard one to fill. But we think that the attributes of an individual go well beyond the ASVAB. We believe that personality diagnostics can lead to an accurate faces to spaces match. We believe that's an aperture opener that will actually increase the population that we can recruit from if done intelligently to match it with the ASVAB. We believe it'll lead to retention, and we believe that'll be ultimately some relief from the accessions problem.
Thank you, sir. Sir?
Yeah, thank you. My name is Chad Pittman. I'm with the Purdue University Research Foundation, and I'd like to direct this to General Carr based on your conversations about Muscatatuck and others. As we muster, build, and develop our readiness in the cyber domain, do you think we have the training platforms that we need? Are we effectively leveraging those platforms? And where do you see the key gaps?
Yeah, thanks, Chad. So for Muscatatuck that Chad referenced, and Purdue is a powerhouse in cyber. Muscatatuck has the only DoD cyber range in a urban environment, and so our cyber is training there, and it's the perfect. It is the platform for cyber support to Corps and below. Do we have enough? We don't, because Muscatatuck is the only location to really do cyber support Corps and below and integrate maneuver forces with cyber teams. So we need more capability, and you can look at any threat brief and know that, and just like General Funk talked about some of the information environment that he faced in Syria, you can look at any threat brief and understand the cyber threat that we're facing. And so the more we can integrate cyber into maneuver training, where both teams, where cyber's not a training aid for the maneuver force, but that the maneuver force and the cyber force are training together to achieve readiness and lethality at the same time.
Yeah, it's kind of our new doctrine, multi-domain operations. That we got to operate in that environment. And we need a deployable or Yeah, probably a deployable capability that we can move from place to place to train that.
And just bring everybody to
It is,
Muscatatuck.
yeah, well, I would rather take the training to the soldiers than the soldiers to the training. So in other words, I would rather take these and apply it. It is X's and ones and zeros.
So case in point, the 25th 225 brought some of their battalions out to Muscatatuck because it was cheaper for them to train there than it was to train on one of the other islands.
See?
So
There you go.
come on and train in Muscatatuck.
Cheap at Muscatatuck.
Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Sean Naylor from Yahoo News. Given the national defense strategy's reorienting of the military and the Army in particular towards high-end nation-state conflict, what steps are you taking, if any, to ensure that the lessons learned at great expense over the last 17 years in low-intensity conflict and counterinsurgency, occupation, that sort of thing, are not going to be lost by the conventional Army in the way that many observers feel they were after the Vietnam War?
I'll take an initial stab at it from a doctrinal standpoint, given my last job. But unified land operations, by definition, is the simultaneous execution of offense, defense, and stability. Stability being the last component of that, and a lot of people think it's a subset, it's something else, it's different, it only happens in a CT or a COIN kind of environment. But the reality is, whether it's a high-intensity conflict or a low, you're going to have stability operations in your support area. You're going to have things you're going to have to deal with in other parts. You're going to have units that you bypass that you may have to deal with on the back end of a major operation. And so from home station to our combat training centers, they have inculcated all those elements of unified land operations to ensure that we don't lose what you're talking about. Now, our CTCs and our combat training centers don't solely focus on stability, COIN, or CT kind of operations. It's the melding of all three of those together. The other thing that I think that we can all kind of take away from the last 17, because in many of our operational constructs, one of the first questions as you're kind of building your framework and having that dialogue with your boss that we're going to have here coming up for our CPX in a couple weeks, it's going to be great. Can't wait. Are we terrain-oriented? Are we enemy-oriented? Those are typically a couple of the big words that you have up front, which kind of drives the approach and the framework that you're going to take. But there's a people component to it as well. What is the people equation? Because when it transitions from enemy or terrain to people-oriented, soldiers and paratroopers, in my mind, get their head around that much quicker than when you start talking about nation building or those kinds of things, because they can understand the human dimension that's out there. Because there's the big debate that's been going on for decades of, do you train for the high end so that you can go do those other things, or do you have separate portions of the Army? I think you can do both, but the high end it's easier to transition, as General Funk pointed out earlier, from there to the lower end stuff. So I don't know if you wanted to add to that.
Well, Jim, you hit it. But you know, war is a human endeavor, and there are, to think that you're going to be able to apply that the last 100 meters involves closing with and destroying the enemy, but the enemy is mixed among the populations. I mean, the urbanization of the world has come on to us. We're going to have mega city fights, and in those there are going to be friends, allies, partners, opponents, you name it. I mean, just look at the fight for Mosul, and I would tell you that TRADOC did a great job with the asymmetric warfare group, specifically on writing the lessons learned from the Mosul fight. And that was a city of 1 million. Imagine what it might be on a city of 27 million or something like that. So it's coming. So I don't think, Sean, to answer your specific question, I don't believe that you can ever step away from those lessons that we've learned for the last 17 years, because there are humans involved in the endeavor, always.
So with that pause, I'll ask the last question, if I may. The Army is currently more ready than we've been in years, and the statistics show that we're more lethal than we've been in years, and we are continuing to increase that capabilities. We've focused our investment along a series of CFTs where do you see there being a gap in an area that we haven't looked at yet, or we need to look at amongst our maneuver forces or against our doctrine that we should address? And I open that to the entire panel, and I'm actually going to ask Mr. Lethality that question first. Where is the gap that we should invest?
There's 648 squads in the Marine Corps. There's 1,650 sergeants. The Marine Corps has manned 26% of its squads with school-trained, grade-appropriate leadership. There's a gap. There's a difference between assigned and on hand. We need to have reporting that differentiates the difference between people assigned and people on hand. I would tell you, I get paid to be parochial. I'll say that straight up. The infantry has got to stop being used as the stevedores of the Department of Defense. We have to use the infantry as a cohesive team that it is. We have to use them as the professional athletes that they are and train them accordingly. So within the CCLTF, we believe that there's a sweet spot in policy that is a gap. We have bespoke personnel policies for SOCOM. We have bespoke personnel policies for the Ranger Regiment. But then it's everything else. And that everything else is still subject to 94-in-1 calculus. So we believe that there is some version of the accepted MOS within the infantry, the accepted manpower policies that provide relief so that we can get beyond squads that are manned below what they should have.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for that excellent question. It was a much more articulate version of my own, which is, what are we missing? My answer is still yes and. What we're doing is great. There's just more to do, and we're not done yet. The piece of that I would highlight is being able to see ourselves from the eyes of our potential adversaries and also from our friends. What are we missing in terms of what more we need to do to make sure that our alliances and partnerships are as strong and effective as they need to be? And what does all of this look like to our potential adversaries? Do they have the clear message that though we don't want a fight tomorrow, we are ready for one and we'll fight and win if we have to?
Thank you, ma'am. And with that, are there any closing comments you would like to make?
Before I do closing, any closing that? Okay, I want to thank our panelists and then also thank all of you for attending and all of your great questions. And so we'll stand by for a couple minutes after the panel for anybody that would like to ask questions to us directly. And again, thank you and appreciate your attendance. Cool.